Well, 2 days after Christmas, and it doesn't get any more Christmassy than Dr. Robert A. Heineman, political science professor emeritus, Alfred University.
Well, thank you for those thoughts, Brian. Thank you.
Before we get to the national issues, I want to do a couple state things if we could.
What have you got?
Well, this is interesting. On that high-speed chase from the other day, the one that went from Jamestown to Wellsville, it came out at the press conference about the suspects. The suspect's girlfriend and son were not charged. Those two argued that they were trapped in the car with the boyfriend and he would not stop the vehicle. I'm hearing that those two, the girlfriend and the son, would not be held with or without the new bail laws. But the suspect, they say the only reason the suspect was able to be held was because of the New York City warrants. New York City wanted this suspect, and otherwise the suspect would have been just ticketed and released at the scene, probably never to return. That's because of the new bail reform laws.
I'm not sure that's accurate. I'd have to look at the is that what they said in the press conference?
Yes.
I can see where the other two passengers aren't charged because clearly they weren't driving, and so what law have they violated unless they, were carrying drugs or something of that sort. But I'm thinking when you have someone this dangerous,
going that fast,
yeah, it's not clear to me that there's not some basis to hold him. So.
Under the new laws, though.
Well,
even vehicular attempted homicide.
The new laws don't go into effect till after the first of the year, as far as I can tell. And it'll be interesting to see how, they're interpreted by the courts. But, again, I'm not that familiar with the laws at all. However, in this case, there wasn't any need to get into that very deeply because there was a warrant from New York City. So let New York City come and pick the fellow up. And but I don't see, I don't know what he's charged with in New York City. So maybe they can put bail on him there. I'm not sure. I'm not certain if a person jumps bail, let's say in New York City, clearly then you got a reason, or jumps his appearance ticket. It seems to me you then have a reason to hold him. But again, all this has to be worked out. I'm just happy nobody was hurt here. That's my bottom line there.
The Watertown Times reports that the state Senate Democrats are probably going to get a super majority in the state Senate because of all the Republicans who have jumped ship from the state Senate.
Yeah, supermajority means the ability to override a gubernatorial veto, although in this case, I don't know, since everybody is Democrat anyway, whether that would come up. But supermajority, I assume, means they'll have a 2/3 of the 63 senators, which would come out to about, 40-some. And it's possible. I mean, they may have gone district by district and kind of calculated it out.
Dr. Bob, do you want to do the year in review first or the impeachment issues first?
Well, I think we can segue into the year in review, I guess, from the impeachment situation. And right now, in terms of the impeachment situation, I think we're just basically in kind of a holding pattern. And it's interesting to watch the Democrats and I guess some of the Republican senators are talking in terms of process. They're not talking in terms of, we have to get this guy. It's more, we have to be fair. We have to be open. We have to be fair, despite the fact that hardly describes how the process was treated in the House. But I think the whole idea here is to somehow stall as long as they can, and Pelosi keeps pounding away that she wants to be assured that it's a fair process. And I think what's happening here is she's hoping that McConnell will not be able to hold his 53 senators together. And already Murkowski, of course, is saying, oh, well, she wants a fair and open process here. This all has kind of the smell of the way the Kavanaugh nomination was treated when Senator Flake jumped ship and insisted that there, in fact, be a FBI investigation of this woman's charges against Kavanaugh, which it turned out to be in Kavanaugh's best interest, actually, and it could in this situation as well. But the idea that you try to dig up as much as you can and to try to defeat the particular proposal. In one case, Kavanaugh, in the other case, try to get Trump impeached, which I think the broader picture here with Trump and the impeachment process is try to find something that will really embarrass him and try to besmirch his whole campaign effort. And I don't know, I think they're kind of at odds, at a loss there in that respect. By the way, Brian,
yes,
in terms of the campaign and trying to hold up the Senate trial there, obviously for a number of candidates for the presidency.
But on the Democrat side?
Yeah, 5 or 6 of them are senators, and I don't know that it's to their advantage by any means to hold it up. I think they would certainly be interested in just hearing the 2 opening arguments and then voting. But in any case, there's a really quite interesting article in this month's Atlantic Monthly on Joe Biden. And this fellow points out that Biden stutters. He's had a stuttering problem since way back in high school and later, and has worked with it, of course, to be able to avoid it in his speeches and such.
Sure.
But he does have a speech problem there, and that, unfortunately for him, has, I think, embarrassed him in a number of situations where he's had to pause, to grope for other words that he could pronounce without stuttering. And so I think that does explain some of these faux pas that Biden is charged with, when in fact I think it's because he's basically trying to prevent any kind of
stammering issue.
Right, yes. So I thought that was it was a fair article, and I think it's possible. I didn't read it that closely, but I think the guy who wrote the article may well have a problem with stuttering as well.
Oh.
So, at any rate, it does give a little more context to Mr. Biden's campaign there, I think.
Sure. Other year in review issues, if we could go over them quickly.
Quickly? Well,
okay. Swedish climate change activist Greta Thunberg came and went. Elijah Cummings, the longtime congressman, died. Boris Johnson won re-election. You want to take on any of those issues?
No, I don't think so. No, I think first and foremost here, the year in review from my perspective, this has been a tremendous year. And in terms of objective measurements, I don't see how you could argue any other way. And you can look at, for example, the stock market, which is setting all kinds of records, historical records, which means that folks who have pensions and are in retirement or getting ready to retirement are seeing their pensions go even higher. And I do think the Boris Johnson election is going to help the economy even more, because the way I read this situation between the United Kingdom and the United States is that Boris Johnson and Trump will be entering into quite a number of trade agreements, and opening up trade with the United Kingdom even further. And I think the result will help the American economy even more. And tied to that, of course, is the fact that in the past week, the Chinese have said they are removing and lowering tariffs on quite a number of products. I don't think they included soybeans, though. I'm a little disappointed in that. But they did include pork and quite a number of other items, beginning to implement the first stage of their agreement with the United States on putting this trade war more and more to rest. So the Chinese have become much more adaptable, and Trump has been successful in getting NAFTA revised. Again, in terms of the agriculture, the Canadians are going to move to make it easier to export dairy products to Canada, and there are a whole range of changes there that help the United States and help the other countries as well. They're not major, but they still are moving in the right direction. So you're seeing a number of opportunities there popping up and helping the economy, but also in terms of foreign policy. You see the United States is bringing our troops home and basically pulling out of a lot of these bottomless or endless war situations that we've had. And we're talking to a lot of people. We're talking to the Taliban. We're talking to Kim Jong-un. And basically, at least we're talking to these people. And the results for ISIS and some of these other mobster-type operations have been disastrous. So I think, generally speaking, you have to rate these pretty successful efforts on the Trump administration's part here in the Middle East and in other areas. So I just find it difficult to see where you can categorize the past year as anything more than really quite successful. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump hasn't carried a lot of hyperbole and criticism along with him. And
do you mean things he said or things said about it?
Some of them result from things he said, but any success that the Trump administration has had is immediately belittled by the press and the media. And the fact is they've been tremendously successful. And I think in terms of the public generally recognizes that. Now, one area I think that has been deteriorating badly, and I think part of this is a result of Mr. Soros's efforts here to affect our criminal justice system. But the street people in San Francisco and Los Angeles, New York City, Baltimore, and some of these areas, I mean, it's really not only pretty distasteful, but I think what you're doing here is building up a situation where you're going to end up with some pretty serious epidemics coming out of some of these situations. You can't be letting people just discharge their waste on the streets and sidewalks and such, pretty much wherever they want, and living in tents, and it's definitely going to be a problem. And obviously, there's only so much the national administration can do there. It's up to the locals to bring this under control. And unfortunately, it's some of these major cities, it's out of control. Yeah.
Now, sometimes the conservative commentators will say, well, Nancy Pelosi, clean up your state, or Adam Schiff, clean up your state, talking about how Schiff and Pelosi are members of Congress in California. Do they really have any input there?
I think so, yeah.
Really? You think they could do something?
Oh, yeah.
It's not just the mayors?
No. I think Schiff, Pelosi, Feinstein, and some of these people, what's our good friend Kamala Harris, could certainly initiate legislation that would allow the feds and the local governments to have more clout. Now, one thing that is being done, and again, talk about successes from a conservative point of view, of course, is the ability to put more and more conservative judges in the courts. And Trump and McConnell this past year have been very successful in that. And again, when you talk about places like California, the ability of the federal courts to back up efforts at the local level could be very important. So if you had some reasonably conservative judges out there, the situation could improve. Now, tied to this and the idea of judges is the whole idea that the courts are going to play, I think, a pretty important role in where all of Mr. Trump and this battle between Congress and Trump goes. I think because of the attacks on Trump, they were going to have, by the end of next year, a kind of perhaps a fundamental redefinition of the powers of the presidency. I mean, there are 3 or 4 or 5 major cases that are almost certainly going to end up some of them already are in the Supreme Court, which will define things like executive privilege.
Trump's right to talk to the Ukrainian leader on the phone, I think is what you're referring to.
No, what I'm talking to is his refusal to allow Bolton and a number of his other aides to testify before Congress or testify in any way about their conversations with the White House. The president has executive privilege, and the question is, can these people be forced by Congress to testify? And the question is, what's the Supreme Court going to say? Now, the one instance where individuals were forced to testify, of course, is the Nixon case. But in the Nixon case, this comes out of an actual court proceeding, a criminal proceeding in a court of law, where they needed testimony from certain witnesses. And there's nothing anywhere resembling that in the current situation. There's no crime identified. There's no criminal process in place. There's no real reason why Congress can just reach out and say to presidential aides, hey, hold it, we want to hear what you had to say in this meeting or that meeting. So anyway, we'll see what the courts say on that. But you also have the question of the president's income tax returns previous to his having been president. Does the president have to release those? And again, that raises all kinds of questions. So, and there are a number of other points there in terms of the president's power to overturn regulations and things of that sort that come into play. So I think it's going to be a very important year in terms of what presidential power looks like as the court interprets it. And tied to that, of course, is the health of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how that holds up. So you could, in this whole impeachment process and some of these other areas, if Ginsburg's health does not hold up, you could end up with another appointment to the Supreme Court initiated by President Trump. So there's some very important things on the horizon there that could favor the conservatives, pretty strongly.
A tweet from President Trump from Thursday. Despite all the great successes our country has had over the last 3 years, it makes it much more difficult to deal with foreign leaders and others when I'm having to constantly defend myself against the do-nothing Democrats and their bogus impeachment scam, bad for the USA.
Yeah, well, I think it's amazing what he's been able to do, given all the terrible press that he's gotten. And I think it's amazing how effective his people have been in areas, for example, in Europe, with regard to NATO the fact is, we've managed to convince most of the NATO countries to up their support for NATO, and we've placed. We have American troops in some of these really quite vulnerable areas now, so we've given them support as well. And it's kind of interesting. In one way, Macron, who called NATO brain dead and was critical of President Trump, is having really serious problems in France right now with riots and street parades and attacks on his attempts to cut back on union benefits and pensions and things of that sort, things which frankly need to be done in a lot of ways. But, boy, he's paying a real price for that right now. So who is he to be talking is what I say.
Another couple of tweets from President Trump. This was from Thursday. NASDAQ hits 9,000 for the first time ever. Trump's stock market rally is far outpacing past U.S. president.
That's true. So what do you want me to do about that? Yeah.
Well,
No, it's true. And as long as he's just tweeting things like that, I don't have any problems. But what's really going to be a problem if he starts tweeting, let's say Murkowski continues to waffle here. And again, Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, she waffled there on the Kavanaugh situation. And again, she's not all that tied to the Republicans because, of course, she was defeated in her re-election bid by a conservative Republican in the primary in Alaska, and so ran as an independent, and I believe won on a write-in vote in Alaska. Now, she votes generally with the Republicans, but to call her, her tied into the Republican fold all that closely, I don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see if McConnell can hold his Republicans in line, because, again, you've got Romney, who's very unhappy with Trump, and not, I think, with his policy so much, but he just personally doesn't like Trump. But there's probably quite a few in the U.S. Senate that take that position. So the point is, if Trump comes tweeting and nasty and personalizing Murkowski, that's not good, because the rest of the senators that's going to make other senators.
It'll victimize her, and he'll be mean.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's okay to do an overthrow attempt, but
yeah,
you can't complain about it.
Right.
Or you're mean.
Yeah, what?
Or you're mean if you complain about it.
Yeah, well,
that's the rules.
Trump tends to be pretty nasty in the personal terms, and that's one of the least attractive aspects of him. But on the other hand, again, looking back at the year, man, oh man, we're in pretty good shape. And then you look at some of the situations like in South America, boy, we look pretty good.
With that, we have to go. Dr. Bob, as always, thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in 2020.
Yes, I just hope a happy new year for everybody, and let's keep things rolling, folks.